Welcome to Block 9, I do believe. And Isabella arrives in Klang. Now then, I hope you've been following all this. If you haven't, and you're just stepping in at this stage, well, you're welcome to continue. But there are already 8 other blogs beforehand, and you should perhaps start at the beginning. But you could also read all this as we go along, and probably the written form is more detailed in some respects. Just to explain what's happening here is that we were going to make a documentary about following in the footsteps of Isabella Bird, Victorian blogger extraordinaire, who came and visited Selangor and Perak and Sungai Ujong in 1879. And we were going to follow in her footsteps and tell people about some of the stories that about the British residents that she encountered. But we can't because, the virus. And that's stopped us. And so I turned the script into a blog. And this is the vlog blog. Right, that's explaining things. You'll get this explained several times over if you start again. But, one has got to do these things. Right, so where are we? We're in Klanger. And Isabella Bird did not like Klang. It was dismal. It was a wreck of a place. There are reasons for it being a wreck, but perhaps it was something of a wreck beforehand, a bit of a backwater. Even before the British got involved with a bit of gunboating and so on and so forth. But what had happened is that oh, well, I'll get onto that in a minute. But first of all, when Isabella arrived in Klang, the person that she met was the resident Douglas Bloomfield. Or was that Bloomfield Douglas? Bloomfield Douglas. Mr. Bloomfield Douglas. Strange name. And apparently a bit of a strange character. She did not like him at all. She thought he was something of a rogue, and his methods were somewhat chaotic. Let's put it that way. I can't help feeling a certain amount of sympathy for the man, because he'd inherited a rather chaotic situation, and we'll go into that later on. Emily Innes. Now, Emily Innes wrote a book called The Chersonese Ungilded, sort of an antidote to Isabella Bird's book, and she takes a very jaundiced view of Mr. Bloomfield Douglas and Klang and Malaya entirely. And in fact, it's very interesting to just compare the two narratives. So you can get the book if you go to the website and click through to Amazon and other places that might sell the book. But it's very interesting to look at what she wrote because the prose is so modern. In fact, you can detect rather modern attitudes and a modern way of writing, whereas Isabella Bird sounds very Victorian. Now, I can't help feeling that Emily Innes was perhaps the future of the empire. That she was there with her husband, who was the tax collector in Bloomfield Douglas's administration, and they'd come out there for a job. They weren't terribly interested in Malaya or the Malays or Malay culture or very sympathetic about them. They rather found them all a bit silly. Whereas characters like Bloomfield Douglas, although rough and rather terrifying on occasions, apparently he was very taken to shouting at people very loudly and insulting them, telling them what a bunch of idiots they were. He'd been around Malaysia for a long time. He'd worked with Rajah Brooks in Sarawak, and perhaps developed some of his methodology whilst they were out fighting pirates in that area. And that was rather controversial, but so Rajah Brooks and others of that ilk were pretty integrated within the local Malay culture in many ways. And they were interested in it, and they spoke Malay and so on and so forth. So Bloomfield Douglas probably got his job because of his connections along that line. So how he got his job is a little bit of a mystery because, he was, let's put it this way, working in Australia, and he was dealing with mining operations up in Darwin for the government. He was handing out licenses and was handing them out to a man called Dominic Daly, who just happened to be his son-in-law, and we met him on Bukit Putus, by the way. And it was connected with the governor of Adelaide, who's Dominic Daly's father. And it was rather, they all got caught up in a rather dodgy, corrupt practices suit and ended up just about escaping going to jail, but he ended up bankrupt. And as one would, he then took a job in Singapore and as a magistrate, of all things. And of course was offered this very important job up in Selangor, which was a bit of a poison chalice, to say the least. Let's put it this way: it was a very dangerous sort of situation, and they probably thought, well, this is a roguish sort of character, and he's probably the only guy that would be stupid enough to want to take this job on. Anyway, more of him later on, because let's just talk a little bit about Emily is here, because she's a bit of an interesting character. She had a rather, expat-y flavour to her. One meets such people nowadays. They come out into on assignment with banks and whatever, and they end up living in expat enclaves, practically ignoring the fact they're in a different culture and a different environment, and look upon the outside world of the country they're in with a certain amount of either indifference or pity or frustration, because it just doesn't work the same way as they're used to. You can go to the supermarket, but you can't get a decent can of Heinz baked beans or something of that kind. In fact, Emily was always complaining about the terrible food that they had to eat and how difficult it was to get hampers from Fortnum and Mason's sent to them, and they were trying to get stuff from, I do believe they were actually getting stuff from cold storage. Cold storage, for those of people who do not know the area, are still operating in Malaysia. So she was, let us just say, somewhat depressed about her environment. The housing was terrible, the heat was terrible, and the natives were not necessarily unfriendly. It's interesting, some of the friends that she made. And we'll talk a little bit about her friendship with Raja Yusuf, who's a bit of a villain of the piece, but never mind. Whatever her attitudes were, one cannot help feeling that when she was hit in the head with an axe, it did actually prejudice her opinion from then on about Malay culture, and the Chinese in particular. They all seem to have a thing with problem with the Chinese, these people. But we'll talk about that later on. So just moving on then. What was the situation in Senegal? I keep calling it Senegal. Selangor. The situation in Selangor is that Abdul Samad was the Sultan. Now then, let's just go back on this tortuous story to in 1867, where the previous Sultan died. Abdul Samad sort of pushed himself into position as Sultan, displacing the other Sultan's sons, who were not too pleased about it, but luckily they died. Old age, indifference, I'm not quite sure what, but mysterious circumstances, probably not. I think it was the mosquito knocking off one of them. Anyway, they went out of the running, and Abdul Samad was a Bugis, and he was backed by a Bugis team in Lukut. Lukut is now Port Dickson, basically. And Lukut had been was a model Bugis community. They ran a very lucrative mining operation, and they had a modern city with policemen and lighting and drainage and Knights saw him, and the British were deeply impressed by their efforts there, their modern city that they built, or modern village, perhaps. That's perhaps better what it was. And so they just did business with them. There was no problems with them. And Abdul Samad was a bit of a modernizer. He wanted some of that. He wanted to take this dismal backwater of the place that had been run down by the Mandling and Minangkabau settlers there who were more traditional and so on. They weren't interested in developing the mining industry, despite the fact that there was thousands of Chinese floating around digging holes in the ground, all of which could have been taxed rather neatly if one goes about it in the right way. So there was money to be made, basically, and Abdul Samad thought, right, we're going to have some of that. Unfortunately, when he gave one of these Lukat connections a job as the chief of Klang, he had to sack Raja Mahdi. Raja Mahdi was the grandson of the Sultan, the ex-Sultan, the dead Sultan, and thus kind of felt that he had a job for life there, and so did his sons have a job for life, and so on and so forth. Traditionally, he should have had that place, and so he was not pleased to be displaced. But Abdul Samad offered him the hand of his fair daughter, Princess Ava, which, after very little consideration, Raja Mahdi turned down. Now then, quite frankly, if you're married to the daughter of the Sultan, you might think that you might lose one job, but you're going to get another job. You're going to get into a position of power, especially if you have a son and you've got the heir coming up. Or, that's not a bad job. But there was something about Princess Ava that he didn't quite like. Perhaps her habit of beating her servants to death made him rather reluctant to take her on and let her loose on his household. But whatever it was, he turned it down and he said, I'm going to have Klang. And he took Klang by force. He got them, he had Minangkabau allies and the Mandling allies, and they came in and they took Klang back from Abdul Samad. And Abdul Samad ran for cover. He never quite got over this, really. He had a distinct hatred of the Mandling. From then on, what they did any better, any worse than the Minangkabau, I don't know, but the Mandling were the ones that he had it in for. He runs for cover and he offers, Princess Ava to Prince Kudin, or Raja Tengku Kudin, or Tengku Kudin. A lot of these names are honorifics, really. Anyway, Tengku Kudin was a prince of Kedah, and another modernizer. He was a guy that walked the walk and talked the talk. He could get on with the British and hang around Penang and smoke cigars and drink his whiskey with them and wear a suit and so on and so forth and do business. And then he could go back to Kedah and be a traditional Malay. He had his foot in both camps. And Abdul Samad was thinking, this is the future. This is what we've got to do, which sounds very wise. And Abdul Samad has gone down as one of the as a very important and curiously well liked sultan. I do believe he was reputed to have killed 50 men with his own bare hands. So that's perhaps why he was so popular. I'm not entirely sure, but Abdul Samad was a wily old bird. And he invites Kudin to help him and offers Kudin the job of running Klang, as well as the hand of his princess. So Kudin thinks, okay, I'll do that. I can handle old Princess Arthur. He didn't really know much about her. But so he took that on and he brought his men in from Kedah along with Captain de Fontaine. Captain de Fontaine, if you remember, was involved in that fracas up the river in Sungai Ujang. In fact, that's in the future. We're actually, this is a story that's prior to that. So Captain Fontaine, he ran the artillery and all the modern equipment and equipped itself pretty well. And with his force, they took over Klang and they kicked Mahdi out. And it was a little bit of a firefight, to say the least. And Mahdi's forces were scattered and Mahdi had to run for cover in Sumatra. Thus, you'd think that would be the end of the matter. Now Tenku Kudin's in there, they can do their deals with the Lukut faction, and all the Bugis can come in and get their jobs going, and well, to hell with the Mandolin. But, right, now then, the wedding between Kudin and Princess Arthur did not go well. Well, the honeymoon certainly didn't go at all, really. She complained that his teeth were too white. Well, and you may think that was that's a pretty good thing. But if you're in a culture that the warriors file down their teeth and blacken them to make them look more fierce and so on, well, white teeth. It was all too Western, too English, too alien. He just would not fit in. In fact, the sons of Abdul Samad also didn't like Tenku Kudin because, well, quite frankly, they thought that if anybody was going to get the job of running Klang, they should. Well, let's just say that Princess Arthur's situation rather deteriorated somewhat, and she refused to live with old Kudin and set up a house with Abdul Samad, who was probably thrilled to death that she was there. And Emily Innes describes the palace as a big shed. She had a rather low opinion of this ramshackle place. There's a picture of it in the blog. You can go and have a look at it. And she was, let's put it this way, her main hobbies were essentially beetle nuts and opium. So being stoned out of her mind all the time was perhaps part of her shtick. That, well, Emily Innes and Isabella both met her and found her a rather strange woman. Anyway, so what's happened now is that Mahdi has been kicked out in Sumatra, and you would have thought that was the end of the matter, and Kudin could modernise the place, and the British would not be coming in there to restore order or anything like that. Nothing nonsensical like that was going to happen. Except, of course, Penang had quite a nice little armaments business on the side. They equipped people with arms from Krupp in Germany, and they could find financiers. You could find someone to finance your campaign if you offered them a good deal with a mining contract of some sort. So Mahdi got some funding from Penang and re-equipped his army. More of this later on. So, it's getting exciting, isn't it? It's also getting incredibly complicated. But you'll hear more about this in the next blog. So go to the website at lawrencegray.net/travel with a capital T, or is it an uppercase T, whichever way you roll, and /blog-2. But, if you try and find in the footsteps of in the footsteps of Isabel Bird, you'll get there. And you can see all this stuff being lined up blog by blog by blog with the videos, and so it's easy to follow everything. And you can read the stuff, and you can listen to me rambling on endlessly, doing my impersonation of a mad professor. Unfortunately, nowadays it's perhaps not such an impersonation as actually being one. I've obviously been locked down far too long, because that's why I'm doing this, because I've got nothing better to do. I should be out filming and doing a proper, documentary with me walking through the streets of Klang and declaring well thought out sound bites. But there you go. This is what we've got. So, could be that side, or it could be that side, maybe both sides this time. Subscribe, and share, and comment, and we'll carry on the story of the rather tortuous and underhand manner, let's just say, in which the British ended up controlling Selangor. Right. See you next time. Bye. Am I going up or am I going down?